Hi there, my name's Eddie, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Wolfsbane Witch. And today I'm going to be doing the Why Witchcraft tag by Lennan Smith. This is a tag that is explained a little bit more in her video, which I'm going to be linking in the description below, so definitely check that out, check out her channel. I came across this tag today and I thought the questions in it were really cool. There's going to be 13 questions and I'm just going to go through and answer them, and hopefully you can get to know me and my practice a little bit more through it. This is a pretty new channel, so I thought this would be a great tag to kind of get to know me. Let's just head right into question number 1, which is the first encounter with the word witch. Now, I never really thought about this until I read this question, and I thought it was so interesting because it brought me back to my childhood when I was like a really little kid, and I would hang out at my grandpa's house. And my grandpa was pretty old school, even for like the early 2000s. Like, he didn't have DVDs or anything, but he did have a bunch of old VHSs. And so whenever I went over to his house, which was pretty often, we would just sit in the living room and watch all these old VHSs, like Garfield and Felix the Cat and stuff like that. A lot of black and white movies as well. But my favorite was The Wizard of Oz. I don't know what it was about The Wizard of Oz that really like drew me in. I think it was just like the fantasy setting that was like a little bit dark and a little bit creepy. Something that was different from a lot of the children's media that I saw. And I think it being live action also played into it. Like, those flying monkeys when you're a kid, terrifying. Absolutely uncanny. But it's also just fascinating to like watch them move and like watch the actors be in them. And even as a little kid, I still kind of had this awareness that they were actors. So even though I was scared, I was also just like fascinated by what I was seeing. And so I ended up just watching this movie like all the time. It became like a cult classic of mine. I don't know if you know about Rocky Horror Picture Show or the Rocky Horror Show, but it's kind of like a cult classic. And there's sort of a culture behind it where the audience participates with the film or the play of it. And so like during certain scenes or like during certain lines, the audience will like shout something or like use props or like do something. And I'd never seen this before in my life, but like as a kid, I was so obsessed with The Wizard of Oz that like I came up with like my own thing. And my grandpa, bless his heart, he loved me so much, like he followed along with me, and like we would watch this all the time, every time I came over to his house. And every time The Wicked Witch of the West came out, we had like these pieces of paper that we would like crumple up and twist into like a cone shape. And we would like put it on our nose to be like a witch nose, and we would like do the evil witch laugh. And I don't know why that was the thing that I came up with as a kid, but that's what I did whenever the witch came on screen. And so like that was my association with witchcraft, was The Wizard of Oz and good memories of my grandpa. So honestly, not a bad first exposure to the concept of witches or witchcraft. And by the way, even though I was kind of freaked out by the movie, I was never really scared of the witch. I was more freaked out by like the atmosphere and also the monkeys. Fuck those things. Fuck those things, for real. Okay, question number 2. What was your first witchcraft path? Okay, so when I started witchcraft, I was probably like 17 years old. I was just in the beginning or middle of my senior year in high school. And at the time, I was completely atheistic. So what I did was I worked with magic using the psychological model. The psychological model is essentially viewing magic as a mental therapeutic act or some sort of placebo effect type thing. So I viewed it through the psychological and archetypal sort of union lens. That's a broad oversimplification of it, just to spare the length of this video, but that's basically the angle I viewed magic at the time. Number 3. Alright, this one's kind of funny. This one is, what was your first magical working? And I'm gonna take this to mean like, what was your first thing that you did that was technically magic, whether you knew it or not? Not like your first working that you intentionally did, because I find this story to be a lot funnier and a lot more interesting. I didn't even know until several years into my witchcraft research and folkloric research that what this was actually a valid form of folkloric magic. And looking back on it, that just makes it even funnier to me. So here's the story of how I banished a hitchhiking ghost. When I was like 9 or 10, we went to Disney World in Florida, and they have a ride called the Haunted Mansion Ride. It's basically a haunted house. And at the very end of the ride, the seats that you're in turn around and face these mirrors. And there's this effect that makes it look like there's these ghosts that are inside the mirrors that are following you on your way out of the ride. These are called the hitchhiking ghosts. There's 3 of them. There's one kind of chubby, funny-looking dude, and then there's a little short guy with a beard, and then there's one that's literally fucking terrifying. And so we get to the mirrors, and of course, what hitchhiking ghost did I get? I got the terrifying one. And my mom noticed that I was scared of it on our way out of the ride, and so she jokingly kind of poked at me and was like, ooh, like, you know, it was a hitchhiking ghost. It might follow you home. And, you know, it kind of freaked me out a little bit, but we laughed it off and went about our day. We go to a gift shop, and they have these little toys there. And they were like these little mystery pack collectibles, where inside would be a mystery figurine that would represent like a ride or a place in one of the parks. And so I got a bunch of them, and I'm opening them, and they're all from different places and rides from the parks. And I get to the last one, and I open it up, and it's the Haunted Mansion one. And what ghost is it? The same creepy hitchhiking ghost. And when my mom saw it, of course, she thought this was the funniest thing on the planet. And so I tried to get rid of it and like leave it in the hotel room, but she noticed that I left it, and so she hid it and brought it back home to make it seem like it was actually hitchhiking. So she brought it home. I'm freaking out even more, but then I realized it was a joke. But I'm still kind of like freaked out by this. Like, it just gives me vibes. And for some reason in my child brain, I didn't think to like just like throw it away into the trash or something, or like give it to a friend or something like that. No, I wanted it gone. Like, I wanted it out of the house, but I didn't want it in the yard. Like, I wanted it gone. But I didn't know how to do that. And I didn't want to like leave it on its own because I was like scared it was gonna come back, kind of, because like I knew my mom brought it back, but at the same time I was like, what if she didn't? So I was like, okay, strategize. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get this little kennel that's made for a Barbie dog, and we're gonna shove this little plastic ghost in it. By the way, this ghost is not like big or imposing. The ghost was like this big. It was like smaller than my finger. It was not imposing whatsoever, but I was freaked out by this thing. I shove it into the Barbie pet carrier, and then I get some like craft twine and I wrap it all up in the twine. And it's like this like rope looking twine. And I go out, and I lived kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I had a river behind my house. So I went out after school, right before my mom came home when I was all alone, and I threw it into the river. And like, yeah, in hindsight, I was littering, but at the time I was like a freaked out 9-year-old kid. And then come to find out several years down the line that like flowing water and getting rid of ghosts is like a valid thing in multiple cultures across the world. And so yeah, that was my first magical spell. I did a binding and banishing of a hitchhiking ghost toy figurine. Moving on to number 4. Number 4 is, what is your most important tool? Now, I was just gonna kind of do the cop-out and be like, oh, it's just yourself. And like, yeah, I do believe it is yourself. But I feel like it's a lot more entertaining and informative of my practice if I actually just show you one of the tools that's more important in my craft. So I'm gonna do that, even though I do believe that the most important tool in my craft is myself. This is my wand. It is made of pine, and it has this piece of selenite that's just inside of a natural nook that was inside this stick when I found it. I did sand off the tip of it so it was pointed, and I also sanded off the other tip of it so it was pointed. But that's really the only modifications I made to it. I find this to be the most important tool in my practice because this is the only tool in my practice that has a spirit attached to it. And how I know it has a spirit attached to it is because this is the only tool in my practice that I found that when I picked it up, I immediately, through my clairsentience, knew its name and knew that it had some sort of energy inside of it. Typically with all the spiritual things that I find, I do feel an energy on it, but I don't usually feel the same sense of animism that I do with this tool. And I think a lot of that has to do with the context that I found this tool under. I found this tool around the summer solstice, and I found it during a time when I was working with the god Apollo. And when I picked up this piece of pine wood, which is associated with solar energy, I heard the name Solaris. And so I looked it up because it sounded Latin, and lo and behold, it means of the sun. Which I found interesting because I'd never heard the term Solaris. I didn't know it was an actual word. I know solar was a word, but I'd never heard the term Solaris before, so I thought that was really cool. And I kind of see Solaris as sort of a gift from Apollo in a way. And so he means a lot to me in my practice, and he's the only tool, like I said, that I feel has an inherent spirit within it, and that is not just charged with my own personal energy. And so for that, it kind of makes him more of a companion than a tool, and so in a way, he is my most important tool. Moving on to number 5, what is your witchy aesthetic? Okay, so I don't have a word for my witchy aesthetic, but one time I had a friend describe it to me as if Peter Pan was the bad guy pirate. So basically like if a dark fairy pirate was a witch, and gotta say, pretty accurate. I'm not mad. So I guess that's my aesthetic, dark fairy pirate ship. Now number 6, what is your favorite witchy hobby? I have a couple witchy hobbies, I think, but the one that I do the most and the one that I use the most in my witchcraft is definitely wild foraging. I love foraging for wild edible plants during the spring to fall period. There's so many different things I've made. I've made grape juice before. I've made different stews out of sage. I've made things with dandelions before and violets. I've cooked with wild onions and field garlic that I've found. All sorts of things. I just love connecting to the outdoors and learning what plants are edible, what plants are harmful. It helps me connect to the land that I'm on and help learn the spirits that might reside within the land. And so in a way, my wild foraging is a way to collect witchy ingredients and to meet new spiritual friends. Number 7, what is your favorite witchy animal? So this could be like a cat, a dog, a rat, a snake, a crow. I think Lena goes into all of them in her video, so definitely check that out. Out of the witchy animals list, I guess I would probably choose like the black dog. It associates with Hecate, which is my matron deity, and it also kind of associates with the sort of vibe I have going on with my channel. I also just really like dogs. And fun fact, I almost named this channel after the Black Shuck, which is a black dog spirit in English folklore. Number 8, what is your most memorable magical working? So Lennan mentioned about spells that you thought might have failed or you weren't sure were gonna work, but honestly, like, I don't know if I'm in the minority, but I don't really worry about that with my magic. I don't really doubt my magic like that. When I do my spells, I kind of go in knowing either it will or won't work, and so I don't really worry about it. I just know that I'll figure out either way, and it's only a matter of time to find out if it will or won't work. For me, part of the fun of spellcraft is seeing how my spell will work out and if it will work out and how it works out. It helps me be able to tailor my spells in the future to be stronger and more effective. It also helps me know what I'm doing right. So I'm just gonna share like the craziest thing that I've ever seen during like a magical ritual, which would probably be when I first started working with Loki. This was a couple years ago, and it happened to be around the time of the fall equinox, so I decided that on the fall equinox I was gonna do like a ritual for Loki, and I was gonna contact him and do a divination where I would get a pillar candle and use the flame of that candle, since I often associate Loki with the element of fire, to scry into and do a little like divination with him. Since I just started working with him, I kind of wanted to vibe out what we were doing, what this might be about, what I could learn from him, stuff like that. So I set up the ritual space on this table, and I make a pentacle made of salt, and I do candles on each point of the pentacle, and I also do other candles of different fiery colors like black and red. And the candle that represented Loki was orange, and it also had this golden oak leaf design on it. It was really cool. And so I put that on the centerpiece, and that was going to represent Loki, and I was going to use that to scry into. So I do my scrying divination, everything goes well, it was a pretty good divination, and now I'm just sitting there watching the candle burn because I wanted to read the wax afterwards, just to see if I could get any additional messages. And as I'm watching this candle burn, I noticed that from behind, the wax starts coming around the candle, and it starts coming down towards the pentacle I made. And the wax starts coming around, and it's going around and around, and it's circling the candle that would represent the element of spirit on the top. It was the one that was closest to it, so that makes sense. But it keeps circling and circling this candle until it creates like this big blob. And I think, okay, that's weird, but cool. And then the blob starts growing fingers! And I watch as it turns into like this extended hand. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing, so I took a picture of it afterwards because I was like, no one's gonna believe me. There's no way. So after the ritual was over and all the candles were melted and the wax had hardened, I took a picture of it. I'm gonna put it on screen here. That's all I'm gonna say. That is the craziest thing I have ever seen. Number 9, what is your most unpopular witchcraft opinion? I don't know if this is a witchcraft opinion or a spirituality opinion or both, but I'm just gonna preface this by saying I might make a whole video on this topic because this is a lot to unpack. So I'm gonna very, very much oversimplify this. And surprise, surprise, I'm gonna be talking about gender and magic. Yeah, the trans witch has a problem with the gender binary and magic. Give me a cookie, I'm so original. And to oversimplify why, I'm just gonna say a father can love and care for his child the same way a mother can. That doesn't make him opposite and feminine now. He's still masculine. He is simply showing his masculinity in a different way than you would typically see it in the patriarchal society that we live in. That does not mean it is femininity. That is only considered femininity because of the society that we live in that conflates things like love and care and empathy with women. How I would avoid this while using the terms masculine and feminine in that sort of way is to try to look at the ways that they are similar and different within the same concepts. So, for instance, instead of seeing masculine as logic and brain and feminine as emotions and heart, why don't you see what the masculine heart is versus what the feminine heart is? Do they tell you similar things? Do they tell you different things? How do they interact with the world? I feel like that's a much healthier way of looking at masculine and feminine than saying masculine is projective and feminine is receptive, because that really ties back to cis people genitals, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. Moving out of the firing squad range, number 10. In your opinion, what's the color of magic? Quite the flip of the switch with this one. Okay, so I could use my imagination, and when I do, if I was to choose like a literal color and like pick one, I guess I'd say like purple or magenta. But when I actually visualize magic as a force, like as a untangible thing, but when I try to imagine it, it doesn't really have a color. It's more like a energetic force, but it kind of like takes the form of wind or almost like water, but it's in the air. And it's kind of like clear in consistency. So it doesn't really have a color. But when I visualize my magic, like magic coming out of my hands or something like that, when I do magic using my own body or using my tools, typically the magic that will come out of me looks kind of like fire, and it could be varying colors. I can willfully change the colors. But if I'm not focusing on changing the colors, typically it'll look like a almost bright white hot flame or sparks. So maybe that's the color of magic? I don't know. Number 11. What's the hardest lesson you learned from witchcraft? Oh, big one. Okay. This one I would say is probably just because magic can do it, and just because you have the power to do it, and just because you really, really want it, doesn't mean you should do it. When I first started doing magic and it started actually like working, I kind of got a little power hungry, and I used my magic to do things that I would not use it for now. I used that magic to charm people and to manipulate people, to make people fall in love with me even though they weren't ready for a relationship, and I was definitely not ready for a relationship if I was using manipulation tactics like magic in order to get that. And all in all, even though I wanted those things and I had the power to go and take those things, they weren't mine to take. And so I learned that just because you can doesn't mean you should. Or the old Spider-Man thing, like with great power comes great responsibility, or something like that. Moving on to number 12. What is your witchcraft's ultimate purpose? Okay, so this is a big one, but I've kind of narrowed it down into 4 main things. Basically, this is the reason why I started doing witchcraft, why I was pulled to it, why I continue to do it, and why I see myself continuing to do it in the future. And those 4 things are healing, empowerment, enlightenment, and unification. Does my magic heal myself and others? Does it empower myself or others? Does it enlighten myself or others? And does it unify me with my inner self, with others, with the greater world around me, with the environment, and with the seen and unseen worlds? If it doesn't do this, I don't want to do it in my magic. So I'd say that that's the ultimate goal of my magic. And finally, lucky number 13. What is your big witchcraft goal? Honestly, I think that the last question pretty much answered that. That's pretty much like my whole life's purpose when it comes to my magical path. But I would say that like my big goal for this year is to read more witchy books. Not gonna lie, I've only read like 2 witchy books in my 8 years of being a witch. Most of the research I've done has been historical based or documentary based, and most of the witchy voices that I've heard have been through YouTube videos and not necessarily through books. I think the only 2 witchcraft books I've actually read like all the way through have been Kellyanne Maddox's Rebel Witch and Scott Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs, I think. And those are 2 very different voices from the community, in my opinion. But also, like, 2 sources is just not enough. And I feel like at this point I'm solid enough in my knowledge of witchcraft and folklore that I won't be dissuaded or confused if I see misinformation in a book that I'm reading. So I want to go ahead and actually start engaging more with witchcraft books this year. And of course, I also want to engage more with the witchcraft community at large, which is kind of why I made this channel. So I guess that's my big witchcraft goal for at least this year. And so yeah, this was the Why Witchcraft tag. I literally just filmed this in one sitting, unscripted, unprompted. I'm just sitting here chilling in my room and thought it'd be fun, and so it was pretty casual, and I had a lot of fun with this tag. So if you're doing this tag, let me know in the comments. I'd love to find new channels and new people to follow and to learn from, so definitely let me know if you saw this video. And if you want a witchy hot take video on the whole gender binary thing, and if you want me to unpack that whole thing, definitely let me know on that as well, because I definitely would be down to make a video on that. It might take a while, but it's definitely worth it. Other than that, thank you so much, Lennan. I had so much fun with this, and these questions were awesome. There was a great array of different questions to get to know me and my practice and my personality, and I had a lot of fun. I laughed a lot and shared a lot of fun stories, so thanks so much. If you've watched all the way through this video, thank you so much for watching. If you want to subscribe and you haven't already, definitely go ahead. I'm going to be making more videos in the future, and have a nice day.